Hello, my name is May. Thank you for watching my video. At this point, you probably know what the Barbie movie is, and at this point, you've probably watched at least one other Barbie movie review other than mine. The way I'm going to lay this video out is I'm going to go through the things that I didn't like about the movie, get the worst over with it so that we can focus on the positives, tell you what I did like about the movie, and then I wanted to focus on the different reactions that people have had. I have spent many collective hours watching other people talk about the Barbie movie and criticize other people's views of the Barbie movie. So I kind of boiled it down to a few main beliefs that people were expressing about the meaning of the film and what the point was. And I thought that it might be more productive to go over that than just to talk about my own thoughts about the movie. So I have split screen on my phone. So I got my camera on top, and underneath I have my notes I'll be reading from. Let's get started. Okay, so first thing I didn't like on my list, this isn't chronological order, just in order of how I thought of them, is that it was not advertised as political satire. I wondered if it was just me, if I'd missed some trailers or not, but it seemed like a just kind of like a playful, ordinary film, and it turned out to be political satire, which I love political satire, but it didn't advertise itself as such, which seems kind of deceptive. Um, and actually, one of the big things that spurred me to see the movie, I already wanted to because I played with Barbie growing up, and I still have a few of my dolls. Uh, but I started seeing thumbnails of people I was subscribed to, mostly political commentators from the Daily Wire, who were in their titles talking about how the film was woke. And I love talking about politics, so I'm like, okay, I've got to see this movie. But I intentionally didn't watch anybody say anything about it other than that. So I heard it was woke, but that was all I knew. So, next thing I didn't like. This movie, I don't know if you've seen it or not. I'm going to proceed as though you haven't, because I want people who haven't seen the movie to be able to follow along with what I'm saying. It pushed the message that we live in a patriarchy. Basically, it follows around Barbie, who lives in this fictional world called Barbie Land, where there's a matriarchy, and she goes to a fictional world called the real world, where there's a patriarchy. I say that jokingly. I don't mean to make light of people who believe we actually live in one. I personally don't, um, but I understand why some people do. And it was very in your face. It was like they show up, and within minutes, Barbie's getting harassed quite a bit, and getting sexist remarks and getting sexually harassed. Um, and at one point, Ken is off by himself, and he asks some guy. He's like, "I thought this was a patriarchy. Why am I not getting this special treatment for being a man?" And the guy's like, "Oh, we do live in a patriarchy. We're just better at hiding it." It was very overt that it was overtly clear that the people who created this movie, someone, I don't know who all believed what because it takes many people to make a film, but it was pretty clear that people who made the movie seem to have the opinion that we live in a patriarchy, and they wanted to make that abundantly clear. Fine, it's political satire. It's okay to go over the top. It just, I didn't like it because I didn't think it was funny because humor has the ring of truth to it, and I didn't see much truth in it. Next thing I didn't like. So in Barbie Land, the president is a black woman who is portrayed um, in a very stereotypical manner as the sassy, black independent woman who is angry. I can't remember where I heard it, but there was a video that I saw where someone was complaining about the three stereotypes of black women in movies. One of them is I can't remember the third one, but the first one is like hypersexualized, and the second one is like bitchy, basically. And this woman even cusses at some point, and it gets bleeped out. And like Mattel's logo, Mattel is the toy company that makes Barbie, is like over her mouth as a censor. So, first of all, I don't like watching characters like that because they're bitchy. Second of all, I think it's kind of racist. Uh, Next thing I didn't like, I felt that it did not reflect my own experiences as a woman. Part of that is because I don't believe we live in a patriarchy, but part of that is because most of what the movie addresses is beauty standards. And while I felt very insecure about my looks as a child, I felt just as much insecure, if not more so, about my lack of how do I put it? Okay, let me put it this way. There's unrealistic standards of beauty, and then there's what I like to call unrealistic standards of epicness or unrealistic standards of badassery. And I feel like those affected me quite a lot. It would be really nice to see a movie where instead of addressing beauty standards, that they address the strong female character, which is a term that I love. When I first started hearing it recently, I loved it because it very much it put words to the way that I felt about the women in movies growing up. And a strong female character, for those who don't know, doesn't refer to a strong character who happens to be female. It's kind of like its own term that specifically refers to two-dimensional female characters who basically have no limitations and they're supposed to be empowering to women, but they kind of just have no real depth or substance to their character. So next thing I didn't like. The double standards were characterized as society's message rather than different people with different values. So there's a monologue that a character, I can't remember the character's name, but the actress who plays her is America Ferrera, who I'm a big fan of. I've seen her in like two different shows, one called Superstore that's pretty left-leaning politically, but still really funny. And I love politics, so again, I don't care so much. And the other one is a show that was less political called Ugly Betty, which was around years ago, but I didn't watch it till like a year or two ago, and I binge watched the whole show, and it turns out to actually be really, really good. I like it a lot. But America Ferrera's character goes on this monologue talking about how hard it is to be a woman because of the double standards. And it's stuff like you're supposed to want to have a job, and you're also supposed to want to have kids, but you got to work hard on promoting in your career, but you got to spend more time at home. And you have to be thin, but you can't be too thin. And you have to be pretty, but not too pretty. And you have to be bossy, but nice. And it made me cringe. My eyes rolled in the theater, and I went to see the movie with my husband, by the way. Um, and I was thinking at the time, I'm like, first of all, those are different people who have different values. Maybe there are some people who actually have double standards, but for the most part, the people telling you you should go out and pursue your career are not the same ones who are telling you you should spend more time at home with your kids. Usually the people who are mocking you for not being thin enough are not the same people who are mocking you for being too thin. And it's just when we hear things around us in society, when people are talking about their values and impressing it upon us, especially when we hear different people mirror the same sentiments, we kind of perceive it as society. Maybe that's right, maybe that's wrong. I have to think about that a little more, but that is seemingly what we do. And so, first of all, those double standards, I saw those as it's people who are different, saying different things to you, and you're trying to please everyone rather than understanding that different people are going to hold different views, and some people are going to approve of your choices, and some people aren't. And the next part about that monologue is that it could easily apply to men. And I say this because, so, I mean, my husband we've had many conversations about how hard it is for him. This is well before the Barbie movie, because one of the things that he's uh, kind of been told by, in his estimation, society, and I pushed back on the society thing with him too. Even with him, I'm just like, it's just individuals. Um, but for him, he came away with the message that he only matters if he can provide. his only value and his only worth is based on what he can do for other people, for his family, for his future wife, for his community, for his parents. That's all that matters. And that it's sad. It's sad when that affects his self-esteem, because I see him as having real deep intrinsic value aside from just what he provides. Although it is important for him to provide, that's not what makes him matter. And actually, it was great because somebody on Facebook had posted a monologue of the same type as America Ferrera, but they included all the double standards of men, and I loved it. And I was just like, yeah, thank you so much for posting this. And I mentioned my husband, and I linked my husband's name so that he could see it too. And I got comments under there accusing me of being a pick-me girl, which, for those of you who don't know, this is my understanding, but a pick-me girl is a woman who is misogynist, sexist against other women, even though they are a woman, but particularly they do it thinking it makes them more valuable to men. Like, they want men to see, I'm better because I'm not like the other women. All those other women are, negative stuff, but I'm not like them. I'm better than them. And the person, one of the people who accused me of being a pick-me girl, linked me to a quiz that like tests your internal misogyny, and I took it, and I scored very low. Actually, I scored 3 times as much as what I would have, because 2 of the questions were about like trust, basically. It was like how much do you trust a woman you don't know? And I didn't say fully. There was some level of doubt in there, which shows that I had some internalized misogyny, but it was a gender neutral answer, and I would have answered the exact same for men too. And I can't remember what the other question was, but I scored very low, and I would have scored even lower if they hadn't asked me a question about women specifically that actually applied to just everyone. Yeah, so the double standards monologue, I didn't like that. Um, okay, so another thing I didn't like about the movie is there's this thing that is very common on the internet. It's positive affirmations. And there are people who do this in person too. The positive affirmations, basically telling someone how wonderful they are, or telling yourself. And I've always found them so weird and gross. And it sounds so insincere, especially if you're making a video. Like, let's say you got someone who you have 73,000 people watching your video, and you're just looking into the camera, talking to every single viewer, but making it personal. And you're like, you are beautiful. You are so special. You're so wonderful. You're perfect just the way you are. And there was no one else as incredible as you. It's like, there's 73,000 people watching this video. Am I supposed to feel special? Because you're saying the same thing to everyone. It's like a participation trophy. It's meaningless, pretty much. It's just there to make you feel good. And instead of there's this part where America Ferrera's character is talking to Barbie, trying to reassure her and talking about how beautiful she is and how special she is. And it's like, okay, but the point of the movie seemed to be that women in general should feel good about themselves, and women in general should realize they're beautiful and smart and funny and strong and independent and whatever else. But it's just towards Barbie. Why can't she have compliments geared just towards Barbie that's like, here's what makes you special? Instead, it's these positive affirmations where she's just saying good things, and all the women watching, I guess, are supposed to somehow feel special because of the monologue. I think it's so insincere and so cheap. The next thing I didn't like, I call it the conservative straw man. Usually I call it the conservative straw man. Uh, Basically, there's this concept, and I suppose it's a little bit of a conspiracy theory, although I think there's pretty good evidence for it, that in Hollywood, there's a left-leaning political tilt, and anyone who's on the right, specifically conservatives, have a harder time making it in Hollywood because there's anti-conservative bigotry, but specifically, there is often a character in a TV show or a movie who represents the conservative or the right-leaning individual. And these characters are either angry or aggressive or violent, or they're just like uh, negligent idiots who risk putting other people in danger because of their carelessness. And I call it the conservative straw man. It's so common that I'll watch a show or a movie and I'll be like, oh, yep, there he is. It's the conservative straw man. So what they did with Ken was they made him a sympathetic character, and then they had him do something pretty crappy. He instituted the patriarchy in Barbie Land, and now it's like, what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to sympathize with him, or are we supposed to feel guilty because we're sympathizing with someone who promotes the patriarchy and he's doing something wrong? For the most part, I've seen a lot of sympathy for Ken, even from like the left and from people who loved the Barbie movies, politics. I only saw one person online who criticized somebody for liking Ken. They're like, "Why? He was the bad guy. He brought the patriarchy." But it's like, that's kind of the point. There's a character that you come along and you're a conservative and you're like, oh, that character is like pretty cool. I like that guy. And then they do something really stupid or dangerous or wrong. And then it's kind of gaslighting. It's like, well, do I like them now because they started off kind of like me and kind of relatable? Or do I hate them now because they did this thing? And yeah, it's just the conservative straw man. And maybe that's not their intention. I cannot say what their intention is. I can only speculate, but I don't know for sure. I don't know if anyone really knows for sure, but I'm open to the possibility that some people are just really good at reading others' intentions. Um, and of course, we can assume that the creators, if they say their intentions, are honest about it. But we will never know for sure. This is just my personal opinion so far still. So I mentioned the positive affirmations earlier, how I didn't like that. But another thing that bothered me is at the end of the Barbie movie, Ken and Barbie are having this heart to heart where Barbie apologizes for mistreating him and for ignoring him, and she's trying to make him feel better. He's crying, which I was worried, by the way, that they Barbie was going to criticize him for crying. I'm like, don't do it. But she's like, it's okay to cry. So I liked that. Um, but she's trying to make him feel better. And he's like, I don't know who I am if you don't love me. And she's trying to convince him that Barbie is not what defines Ken. But she kind of doesn't really say anything special about him that I remember. She was just like, you're Ken. You're Ken. He's like, oh, am I special because I'm good at beach? And she's like, no, you're special because you're Ken. Well, am I special because of this or that? No, you're special because you're Ken. And finally he realized it. He's like, yeah, I'm special because I'm Ken. Yeah. And it's like supposed to be this uplifting moment, this great character arc where like Ken finds himself and now he and Barbie have made up and she's apologized. But with all the positive affirmations Barbie received earlier, it was just so cheap. Barbie was told like, you're beautiful, you're smart, you're funny, you're independent, you're brave, whatever it is, and Ken just got, you're Ken. That's can't you can't come up with anything else to say? How about, yeah, you are really good at beach, or you're a loyal friend, or you're so brave, and I'm so happy that you came along with me to the real world. There were so many things she could have said about him, and she kind of just summed it up to "you're Ken," and that was supposed to be good enough, and I did not like that. This is a criticism that came up with a lot of people. It's hard for me to tell how much is just me because my thoughts were everywhere during the movie and I probably missed some stuff. But I felt like there was a hard to follow storyline, and a lot of other people said the same thing, that it was the plot line wasn't consistent. And there were things that didn't get wrapped up quite right, and there was a lot of lazy writing. The ending felt a little bit forced. Part of that was the apology for me. Part of that was the apology. Part of that was Barbie deciding to become a real woman. Um, and part of that was the mother-daughter relationship being healed. But we didn't really see those things actually resolve. It kind of was just this, well, we need it to end positive, so we'll just make it happen. Right? We want Barbie to, we think it would be beautiful if Barbie embraced the imperfections that come with being human, and she embraces these imperfect body traits, like her healed foot goes flat and she's got cellulite, and she decides to become a woman anyway, but we don't really know why. It's not made very clear. And there's this rift between America Ferrera's character and her daughter, and the reason Barbie goes to the real world is to fix their relationship, but there's not really a healing of the relationship. They just kind of go through the plot line, and then suddenly they're close at the end. They just kind of become close somehow, and there's no conflict resolution or deeper understanding of what caused the rift to begin with. And of course, I already mentioned how crappy the apology was to Ken, and how he didn't really get any positive affirmations. So ending felt forced. It's like an example I could give. This is something that bothers me about the movie The Nightmare Before Christmas, is Jack takes over Christmas and he completely ruins it. And then close to the end, he has this like little song where he's like, "Oh no, what have I done? I've ruined everything." And then he's like, "No, you know what? I deserve to have the Christmas that I want. I didn't do anything wrong because this is for me and I deserve to be happy too." And then a few minutes later, he's apologizing to Santa for ruining Christmas. And it's like supposed to be, oh, he became the good guy at the end and he realized his wrongdoing, but he kind of didn't really. They just lazily threw in the right lines that made him look like he became the good guy at the end, because that's what people want to see in movies. We want to see moral character in our movies. So, the Barbie movie ending felt a lot like that. Like they forced it to have the ending that people were going to like, even though it didn't really lead up to that point. Um, Also, I mean, a lot of people have talked about sexism in this movie as being man hating, and a lot of people have pointed out it's not really hating men. It's just trying to talk about the the way that women feel in the patriarchy, and it's trying to show men what it feels like to be an oppressed woman by reversing the gender roles. Okay, fair enough. But there's more to sexism than just hatred. You can be bigoted and not be hateful. Bigotry can sometimes look like caring about a person, but just not valuing them appropriately as an equal. And that's what I felt that I saw in the Barbie movie. Ken did not, or sorry, Barbie did not hate Ken, but she kind of viewed him as a child. She cared about him. In the beginning, he's like, "Barbie, check this out. I want to show you what I can do." And she's like, "Yeah, go ahead." And she smiled all supportively and encouragingly, and she looked after him when he was hurt, but she kind of treated him like a child, which he was. He was written to be like that. Fair enough. But we see America Ferrera's characters. Her husband shows up, and he shows up and he's kind of treated like a pet, like he's an idiot. And she loves him and she smiles at him and she's supportive of him, but she kind of is just treating him like a kid, like a pet. She adores him, but she doesn't see him on the same level as her. Those are the vibes that I got. And to me, that's where I see actual sexism. It's not men are better or women are better and women should be in charge and men are awful. It was men are children and they're kind of idiots. Um, and I don't know if that's actually how the creators feel about men, but that seems to be how the characters feel about men, and I didn't like that. Um, I got a lot of other stuff to say here, and I got a lot of other notes. I'm starting to run out of steam, so I might cut it short at some point. But I got two more criticisms of the movie, and then I'll move into the things I liked. I'm already at 24 minutes. Okay, one of the things I didn't like about the movie is that it felt like it was kind of gaslighting the audience. So, yeah, at the very end, for example, Barbie Land had been, well, let me just pause and say I'm sorry. I said in the beginning of the video that I was going to talk about it in a way that explained for people who hadn't seen the movie. but that's becoming quite a bit of effort. So from here on out, I'm just going to assume that you've seen it most of the time. I'm sorry about that. Hopefully you can still enjoy the video, and if not, click out. It's okay. You don't owe anything to me, so it's okay if you don't finish. Anyway, so when the matriarchy is restored to Barbie Land, the narrator's like, will there ever be equality in Barbie Land? Will the Kens ever have equal rights? And they're like, she's like, there in Barbie Land, there will be as much equality in Barbie Land as there is in the real world. And there's kind of like a double meaning there, because either it's saying we live in a patriarchy and we're not going to see uh, an equal place in Barbie Land because, well, why should there be? If the real world is unfair, then Barbie Land should be unfair too. Or if you don't believe there's a patriarchy in the real world and you believe that things are equal, or anywhere in between, then you don't have to worry because Barbie Land is going to mirror that one day. But it kind of felt like, so obviously the movie is pushing the idea that there is a patriarchy. And then they say, oh, there will be as much equality in Barbie Land as there is in the real world. And to me, as a viewer who doesn't believe that there's a patriarchy now, it came across as like, well, you don't have to be upset. Yeah, we're telling you there's a patriarchy, and yeah, you're seeing a matriarchy now, and yeah, we told you that there's a patriarchy, so why wouldn't there always be a matriarchy in Barbie Land too? But because we're saying that there will be the same amount of equality in the real world, you don't have to worry, because if you don't think there's a patriarchy, then there won't be a matriarchy anymore. So don't be upset. I did not articulate that well. I don't feel like it's hard for me to explain, but it felt kind of like a way to casually dismiss a viewer being annoyed or unhappy with it. But then a lot of the gaslighting kind of came out of other more outside the film than within the film. Like, for example, if you didn't like the matriarchy and you didn't like the misandry that the Kens had to face, then you're making this all about you. This is a movie for women. Why can't we women just have our own movie? Why do you have to make it about you? Why is it about your problems? And I know Ben Shapiro talked about this because Ben Shapiro, political commentator, made a review of Barbie, and it apparently blew up quite a bit, and a lot of people were talking about Ben Shapiro's review, largely to criticize him because he clearly didn't understand the point of the Barbie movie. Um, I'll get into some of that later. But he made a response to it, and he's like, basically he pointed that out. He's like, they kind of made a crappy movie, and if you point out that it's a crappy movie, they tell you you're horrible and anti-feminist and you don't get it. And I kind of noticed that too, right? Like, you think the writing is lazy, well, you just don't understand the movie. Yeah, so it felt like there was some real gaslighting with this movie. And the final complaint that I had is that Barbie, played by Margot Robbie, was referred to as stereotypical Barbie. But she's a character. She's not a stereotype. Maybe she's a stereotypical woman or a stereotypical ideal of what a woman should be, but she's not stereotypical Barbie. She's classic Barbie or original Barbie or default Barbie. I wish they'd use one of those words instead. Something to apply that she is the official Barbie. Whereas, even though there's like a whole bunch of other types, she's the one everybody thinks of when we think of Barbie, because she's the classic, the original, not the stereotype. So, getting into the things that I liked. I liked the little details that were nostalgic for playing with Barbies. I liked that I loved this when I saw the teaser of her stepping out of her high heels and she had like her heel-shaped feet. I loved that. I kind of wish I had a pair of heels to practice on because I would totally practice doing that. I kind of have, just without the shoes. Um, I love the way that when she's like going through her dream house, she just walks over the pool. Like, the pool is just like a big sticker effectively on the floor and she just walks over it. I love that kind of detailing, and I liked looking at the different Kens and being like, oh, I had that Ken, and oh, like the outfit she had with the rollerblades when she and Ken go rollerblading. She has this one outfit. We had a Barbie who had that outfit, who by the way also had flat feet. Um, but I loved that. That was great. As a Barbie fan, I had a lot of fun with the movie. Um, and see, the costumes were great. I loved the casting. Again, I'm a big fan of America Ferrera, even though I seem to disagree with her politics. I say seem to, I don't technically know what her politics are, but this is now the second thing, one being a TV show, and this is a movie, but this is now the second thing that I've seen her in where she is expressed left-leaning talking points, which I agree with some of them. I mostly just disagree with the perspective. Like we're looking at the same thing, and in substance, I see it the same way, but I'm looking at it from a different angle. Um, so yeah. Anyways, so I'm a fan of America Ferrera. I'm a big fan of Will Ferrell. He didn't do much in the movie, but whatever. It's Will Ferrell. I don't care. Sure, they're probably just using him to bring in more people, but hey, it works. It works. I don't care. I'm a big Michael Cera fan. I don't care that he added nothing to the plot. I love Michael Cera. I'm happy he's in the movie. It would have been worth it to see it just for Michael Cera and Will Ferrell, if for nothing else. And I didn't know they were in it till I started watching and I was seeing their names in the credits. So I got pretty excited from like the beginning of the movie. I was already excited and I was really happy my husband was going to see it with me because he didn't really want to. But he loves me, so he did it for me. He ended up kind of enjoying it too. Um, yeah, so good casting. I liked the line. There's this line early in the movie where it's kind of still introducing Barbie Land, and one of the Barbies is talking about how she has feelings, but her feelings not only don't get in the way of her ability to think rationally, but they complement her ability to think rationally, and her ability to feel her feelings as well as to think are her superpower. And I love that. I've always been more of a naturally uh, logical kind of person. And I would always kind of dismiss my feelings on the grounds that they weren't logical, but I ended up learning. And by the way, this wasn't a society thing, um, although even if it was, it's more stereotypical of what men are told, that your feelings shouldn't matter, and you should just toughen up and deal with it. For me, it was more about intuition. Like, if I thought something logically made sense, but my intuition was telling me something was off, I would think, well, it doesn't sound logical, so I'm just gonna go with what I think, even if something feels wrong about it. And it took me a long time to realize that I could trust my intuition and had to take it seriously, um, which is a little bit different than just talking about emotions. I have always acknowledged my emotions. I have a narcissist for a mother, and she is pretty big on gaslighting. And from the time I was a kid, I kind of knew it. And she would basically bully me into telling her what my feelings were, and then she would criticize my feelings, like I shouldn't be angry at her because she didn't actually do anything wrong. And I kind of like revolted against that internally. I'm like, my feelings are my feelings. They're none of your business, first of all, and second of all, I can't control them. She'd try to get me to control my feelings too. I'm like, I can't choose how I feel. She had this line which also comes up in the show Seventh Heaven, and it's such a stupid line, but it's like, just choose to be happy is effectively it. Like, you can just choose to be happy. I'm like, no, you can choose to pretend to be happy. You can choose to not intentionally provoke negative feelings by like working yourself up. You know, you can choose to disengage from social media if it's pissing you off or depressing you, but you can't choose your feelings. Um, and yeah, so the feelings being like part of your superpower, I love that line. I also really liked that Will Ferrell is a great model of what I think many progressives that are high up, like in mainstream media, in politics, in corporations, are, because he's all about the money. He just wants to make money. That becomes pretty clear at the end of the basically at the end of the movie, where he's like, we can't sell Ken dolls in the Mojo Dojo Casa House because it's all about feminism and empowering women. They're like, it'll make a lot of money. These things are flying off the shelves. And he turns around. So clearly he does care about the money. However, he's adamant. He's like, I don't do this for the money. I do this to help little girls and empower them. And Barbie is a feminist icon. And it to me, I'm loving it. I'm like, this is just, it seems like what all the companies do, what Hollywood does, and what the Democratic Party does, is they say, we care about empowerment, we care about, Black Lives Matter, and women should have rights, and reproductive rights, and like, go pride. And it's kind of just them virtue signaling. It's just them acting like they're morally upright just to get what they want out of you, whether that's money or votes or like social credit, whatever it is. And so I thought it was pretty awesome that Will Ferrell, like, whether it was done on purpose or not, I thought it was a great representation of that. And I don't think it was done on purpose. I think it was accidental. I'll get a little more into that later. I mentioned before, I was okay. I love the fact that Barbie encouraged Ken to cry if he needed to. Um, and the final thing is that this movie, regardless of whether it was an actual masterpiece or a piece of crap, regardless of whether it was a forced propaganda piece or whether it was a meaningful, heartfelt, layered message, there's always somebody who can get something good out of something. And a movie that blew up this big with so many people that were interested, and a lot of people who love the movie, I'm happy that there are people out there who are resonating with this movie and enjoying it and who are getting something out of it. I think we all have some quote that somebody said once, or some movie, or some book that left like a huge impact on us. And maybe looking back at it years later, you're kind of like, it kind of seems mundane, but it had a huge impact on you in that moment. And I appreciate that this movie does that for people out there. Yeah, so everything, bad things can be used for good. And the Barbie movie may not have been a bad thing. It may have been a good thing that has been misrepresented heavily and made out to be worse than it is. And I have my own opinions on that, but my opinions aren't certain. They're just my rough perspective now. Um, so, yeah, the big picture here is that a movie, regardless of what the intent of the creators was, can be interpreted so many different ways. And there are wrong ways to interpret things, but there are a lot of ways to interpret them that are correct, that sound contradictory, that are still valid. And because there's so much complexity to literally all of existence, there are going to be people who come out with different views of this that many of them are going to be valid. um, and here are the patterns of what I saw being broken down. I have 7 bullet points listed under this, but it could be one of these or any combination of these, of what the movie intended and what the movie meant and what the movie was trying to say. So the first one, and this, I've mostly heard this as a criticism to people on the right who were critical of the Barbie movie, is that this movie, the point of this movie is to show men what it feels like to be a woman by taking the patriarchy that exists, which again, I don't believe it does, but assume for a moment that it does. They took the patriarchy that exists and the oppression of women, and they flipped it to the gender reverse so that men watching this movie would understand what it felt like to be a woman and understand how hard it would be. I've also heard it said multiple times now that it's meant to show that the patriarchy is bad for women and for men. I'm not sure exactly how it's bad for men. I think I figured it out at one point and then I forgot. If you know how, please let me know how the patriarchy is bad for men. I would appreciate that. Um, the next message that people got out of it is You're not defined by other people or your relationships with other people. Your worth exists whether you are validated by others or not. So don't worry too much about what people think of you. Find your own value within you, and don't be dependent on others for your sense of identity. And I think that's a good message. Another perspective is that it advocates for the matriarchy. This one is the one that's common in conservative circles. Um, the fifth one is it's in the okay. So Ben Shapiro, of course, from the Daily Wire, is one of the people who's like it's advocating the matriarchy and it's hating on men. But Michael Knowles of the Daily Wire, he had a bit of a different opinion about the meaning of the movie. And his take is that it was secretly a conservative movie that was so over the top, like promoting leftist values, that it ended up accidentally, that it ended up making the case against feminism, and showing its ludicrousness. I've heard a couple other people make this point as well, including Shoe on Head, who is a YouTuber that I was unfamiliar with until my husband sent me her review. He says, and I think she said something that indicated it in her review, that she's left leaning. But even she was like, is this like secretly a conservative movie? But it kind of came up, and Brett Cooper of the Daily Wire, who liked the Barbie movie, had a discussion with Ben Shapiro about the subject, and their take was that it was accidental, that it's just the way I've heard it phrased is roughly something like the left's perspective is so disjointed and so out of touch with reality that when they put it on display, it kind of crumbles and contradicts itself and shows how ludicrous it is naturally. That sounds accurate to me. I think that's true, personally. Both that it was accidental and that yeah, people who are stupid or misinformed or lying, if they talk enough, you're gonna be able to see the cracks in the story. Um, so the next one, number 6, this was a take. I was surprised to find this, and I haven't heard anybody else say this. This was a take from a guy named Dave Beal, who is on a YouTube channel called Girl Defined. I found out uh, about, I kind of knew about them a while ago, but I really found out more about them recently because someone I watch on YouTube called Rachel Oates, I love her content, has like made videos criticizing the two of them. They're fundamentalist Christians. Not sure exactly what fundamentalist means, which is why I put it in quotes. But they're like hardcore, stereotypical Christians who make Christian content. And Dave had said that it seemed to him like the purpose of the movie was just create an interesting setup. You got a patriarchy on one side, and then flip it to make a matriarchy and not even have a message. His take was, what if they don't have a message and they're just like, let's just create the scenario, drop the characters in, and just see what plays out. Which I've heard that as a writing tip before, that you don't want to try to force the writing to happen or force your message. If you're really a good writer, you aren't going to know what happens necessarily. You're just going to get your characters to start interacting and you're watching what happens, the same as your audience. And I really like that idea. And I was surprised to hear that coming from him because, I've seen a lot of criticisms of the two of them as a couple and as individuals. So I was pleasantly surprised it didn't match up with all the negative stuff I was hearing. And I'm not leaving this video in my playlist about Barbie reviews because I didn't watch it really. I kind of just looked at it and I read some of the comments. I would have loved to, but I kind of just had to make this video because I've been meaning to for weeks, and I had to at some point just say it's got to be good enough. But one of the comments was also like they were very impressed with him and saying that he showed character growth. But anyways, yeah, shout out to Dave Beal from Girl Defined. Hello. I don't know if you're watching this, but all right. The 7th take, and this was the most interesting video that I watched. It was from a YouTube channel called Verily Bitchy. And the idea was it starts off with this concept that Barbie is marketing girl power. Not Barbie the movie specifically. It starts off with just Barbie herself is marketing girl power as a commodity for generating revenue. It's fake and it's pandering feminism for a profit. Um, and it kind of goes into how it goes into like the history of Barbie and how it was mostly just about saying like girls can do anything to make it sound feminist so that people would buy their dolls because I think it's good for their girls to see Barbie in a STEM field. But how the Barbie movie does the same thing too because, and I take it Verily Bitchy is a feminist. That seems to be pretty obvious to me. But the point was there are so many real serious issues that this movie could have tackled, but they didn't touch on those things. They kind of just threw out a couple of pieces to make it sound like, oh yeah, we're feminist, without actually giving it any real substance. And that that sounds fairly accurate to me. The only difference with it is that I'd seen an article, maybe I can find it again and link it, before the movie was actually released in theaters, that was saying that Margot Robbie and I think Greta Gerwig had taken creative liberties that really like rammed Mattel, threw them under the bus, and Mattel wasn't super happy about it. So there's a possibility that Mattel had less to do with this movie, and the other creators had more to do with it. But overall, the idea is just it's a fake feminism. It's virtue signaling for money. Um, so those were the 7 takes that I've seen for the most part. Uh, if there's anything else, I'm not really remembering it. Yes. See, and I have some additional comments at the end. I'm gonna check this off because I already talked about that. Um, I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but this was another thing I've heard other people talk about. And I agreed with this as well, and I mentioned it briefly when I talked about unrealistic standards of epicness. But their message and positive affirmations, their message focused a little too much on how women are beautiful, all women are beautiful, when instead I and at least one other person was saying they should have talked more about how beauty wasn't everything and beauty isn't that important. I would also like to draw your attention, you may or may not know this, but many years ago, there was an old Disney Channel movie called Life Size, where Lindsay Lohan tries to bring back her dead mother to life using voodoo, and something goes wrong, and she ends up bringing her Eve doll to life. And Eve comes from, this like basically she's like, oh yeah, I've had all these careers and I've done all these things, but she's never actually done them in real life, so she sucks. She's like, oh yeah, I've been a chef, but then she tries to cook and she burns the food. Or she's like, oh yeah, like I've been a secretary, but then she's just typing like random keys on the keyboard. And it kind of ended with this movie of like, you don't have to be perfect to be special, and you don't have to be all glammed up to be good enough. Like, you can be pretty just being more natural and casual. And I think she ends up with a thing where she ended up having flat feet at the end of the movie. But yeah, it's a good movie. I like it. I thought it was much more of a feminist movie than Barbie was, and I think it did a much better job at pushing back against uh, unrealistic expectations for women. I say unrealistic expectations so that I can include beauty and epicness in the umbrella. Um, and see, oh, da da da. Yeah, another thing, by the way, I mentioned earlier that the movie wasn't marketed as political satire, and I found, and it is at the top of the playlist that I'm gonna release because it's the oldest video, but it's from like a year ago where Ryan Gosling is talking about talking about the Barbie movie, and he's saying it's not what you think it is. He's kind of like fumbling over his words. Maybe it's really stumbling. Maybe he's kind of like just being playful. But basically, he's like, this movie is not what you think it is. Whatever you think it is, it's probably not that. Which is evidence that adds to my perspective here and the perspective of many others, that they were going through lengths to deceive the audience as to what the movie was actually about. They tricked us into watching a very political movie under the guise of it's just going to be something fun and lighthearted. So, see, that's one. We already talked about how conservatism is accidental. And I'm just going to read this out loud instead of wasting your time reading it in my head. Actually, hold on a second. Okay, so Brett Cooper, when she had a discussion with Ben Shapiro about this, she said some stuff about how, I think this was in that conversation. Yeah, it was. She was talking about how a lot of men were really sympathetic with Ken, not because they now know what it feels like to be a woman, not because Ken is a man and they were naturally going to sympathize with him because he was suffering, but it's because it actually mirrored their real life experiences. So Ken is supposedly he's meant to show what it feels like to be a woman living under patriarchy, and yet in our real world where there is a supposed patriarchy, men are already identifying with Ken. So do we live in a matriarchy now or what? What is this? Because the patriarchy, the world we live in, contains a lot of female privilege. And by the way, I say this. Now, granted, my community is the one I'm going to know. America is huge. It's got hundreds of millions of people and multiple subcultures, right? But I am in the Army, which now that you know I'm in the Army, I have to specifically state that all the political opinions I've mentioned here are my own personally. They're not necessarily representative of the Army, the Department of Defense, the federal government in any way. They're my opinions. Anyways, I'm in the Army, where like 75% of the population is men. I have never, to my knowledge, been discriminated against as a woman. And I am pretty aware of privilege that I have in the Army as a female. Certain things that I get to do that men aren't allowed to do. And yeah, just thought I'd throw that out there. So, our patriarchy has a lot of female privilege, and in our patriarchy, Ken was not just an inverse of what it feels like to be a woman living under patriarchy, but he was an actual example of what real men are going through now. And another thing they talked about in the Brett Cooper and Ben Shapiro video is that they pointed out that the women were happy under the patriarchy until they were told to be miserable. And they're like, why do you need to, if you need to be informed that you're being oppressed, you're probably not being oppressed, which I got to agree with this. I've, grown up here in America my whole life, and I've never, to my knowledge, really experienced sexism. A couple of minor incidences here and there, but for the most part, even as an insecure child who had very poor self-esteem, I never felt bad about the fact that I was a girl, and I never felt lesser than the boys. At least not because they were boys. Maybe just because they had certain personality traits I wished I'd had. And so I've had conversations with feminists here and there throughout my life. And even though I disagreed with the things that they were saying about us living in a patriarchy, about men looking down on us with less respect because we're different, it affected the way that I felt. And I felt gross about myself for like days after having these conversations, worried that I'd feel like that for the rest of my life. Because in my mind, I'm like, I don't believe this stuff. I don't think any of this is true. But I felt like it was true. And I felt bad about myself as being a woman, especially being a woman in the Army. I'd like look at myself in a uniform in the morning and I'd be like, I'm so weak and puny compared to the guys. And I'd be walking around the halls, and normally I'd just see the males around me like, okay, they're the males, whatever. But then I started looking around and feeling self-conscious, like they were noticing me as a woman and seeing me differently because of that. And I think there's a lot of truth to the idea that if you tell a woman that she's oppressed, it's gonna affect her oftentimes. Now, I will say that there are some women in patriarchal subcommunities. For example, maybe a religious one. I'm Christian, been Christian my whole life, been in church my whole life, so I haven't experienced this personally. It's not a Christian thing specifically, but I have heard a lot of stories like this of Christian communities where there actually are patriarchies and women are supposed to do whatever their husbands say and let their husbands use them sexually instead of having mutually enjoyed experiences, and they're abused and they're controlled and devalued, and they've been taught that's just the way it's supposed to be. Probably they do actually need to be informed that this isn't normal and it's not healthy. So I'll caveat that with usually. Usually, if you have to be told that you're oppressed or don't have equal rights, it's probably not true. You probably actually do have equality. But that's just my take. Um, da, 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 da. Okay. So I mentioned the video where I mentioned the video by Verily Bitchy about how it was pandering feminism for a profit, and I have a quote that I took from this video. That is, and this is a partial quote because there was a thing that came before, but I had to kind of cut it off. But the quote is, "This isn't really a feminist film about feminism." Oh no, where is it? Da, 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 da. Pardon. Got it. Okay, the quote is, "But that's because this isn't really a film about feminism. It's a mainstream film made for the widest possible audience, trying to reach everyone at the same time without saying anything of any real substance. Flattened, plastic wrapped feminism. Verily bitchy." So I thought this was a really good quote. Ultimately, I would say, first of all, we can't know the intentions for sure of the people who made it. And even then, the people who made it, or the director, or Margot Robbie, it's gonna be a mix of different people with different perspectives who had different intentions doing different things. Maybe they lined up, but they're different people. And we can't know what the intention was with absolute certainty. Um, we can have our takes on it, and there are a couple of ones that sound pretty reasonable, but we don't know for sure. I'd like to point out it's natural for us all to watch a movie and take away something different from it. Let's try not to hate on each other for seeing things differently. If a man doesn't like the forced politics of it all, and they think that it's being down on men, they think it's being sexist against men, please don't accuse them of making it all about them. They have valid reasons to complain, most likely. And for people who like the movie, try not to just reduce the movie to it was forced wokeness. I mean, if that's your opinion, fine, that's my opinion too, but try to see it from a more nuanced perspective and realize the value that can be found within it. Um, and yeah, basically look at this with nuance. Realize that it's not so simple, it's not so straightforward, and while there are technically wrong ways to see things, there are many more right ways that sound contradictory that we don't realize actually are all fair and fit together. Because the picture is big. So, yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say. If you've watched this video to the end, thank you so much for spending your precious, valuable, limited time on my video. I appreciate it. I appreciate any subscribes, comments, or likes as well, but I'm not asking you to do that. And I just a reminder once again, I am going to put all this in a playlist, and I'm going to try to make the I'm going to try to put some of the links of stuff I talked about in the video. That's all. Thank you for watching. Have a good one.